Here are some things that you need to know when comparing and translating between English and Swedish. First, it's important to remember that even though English and Swedish are both written in the Latin alphabet, there are some small differences in the spelling conventions. One typical example of this is that words such as Caribbean, which start with C, are often spelt with K in Swedish, as in Karibiska. So we would translate Caribbean with a C to Karibiska with a K. Here's another example. Canada with a K is translated to Canada with a C in English. Another thing to remember is that there are lots of false friends, which are words that look like they have the same meaning but actually have different meanings. A good example of this are the false friends land and land. Land in Swedish is usually translated to country, while land is translated to Swedish mark. So they mean slightly different things, though sometimes land and land do overlap in meaning. Here it's also relevant to mention another key difference between English and Swedish, and that's that Swedish has grammatical gender for nouns. Using the previous example, land, you always have to say ett land, because land is a gender-neutral noun, while önation is always en önation, because önation is always common gender. Just remember that en words are common gender nouns, while et words are gender-neutral nouns, meaning that they have no gender, they're not male or female. Another key difference between English and Swedish is that Swedish uses a lot of compounds and it uses them consistently, while English sometimes uses compounds, sometimes uses hyphens, and sometimes writes words separately. Here are some examples. Here we see that Swedish writes önation as a compound, while island nation is written as two separate words in English. One more example of a compound is kvadratkilometer, which is square kilometers, or alternatively, kilometers squared in English. Another good example of this is the word ursprungsbefolkning, which in English is indigenous population, which is two words in fact. That again is ursprungsbefolkning, indigenous population. Another example is vattenkälla, which is one word, while it's water source in English, which is two words. Finally, we have the compound Nordamerika in Swedish, while in English we have North America, two words. One similarity that Swedish and English both share is that they both have so-called definite forms. An example of a definite form may be, for instance, den norra delen, just like the northern part. We know specifically which part is being referred to if someone says den norra delen or the northern part. That's why it's definite. We know which one is being referred to. Here's another good example, Stilla havet. Stilla havet is a very well-known geographical location, the Pacific Ocean. There is only one of them, and that's why we say Stilla havet with an et on the end, or the Pacific Ocean in English. The difference between English and Swedish in this respect, however, is that in Swedish we generally put a suffix at the end. We say Atlanten, so there has to be something at the end most of the time, whereas in English we generally put something in front of the word and it's a separate part, the Atlantic. So Atlanten becomes the Atlantic. Here's another example. Norra ishavet becomes the Arctic Ocean. They're very similar grammatically, but they look a bit different. Here is an example of a sentence that you might translate. Venezuela är ett land I den norra delen av Sydamerika. And in English I would say Venezuela is a country in the northern part of South America. You don't have to do much with the first word, Venezuela. You just have to pronounce it a bit differently, Venezuela, because it's a loan word and we pronounce it differently in English and Swedish. Then we translate är ett land to is a country. First we have to reflect on the fact that Venezuela is one country, so we have to say is a country. We can't say Venezuela are a country, it must be Venezuela is a country. Then we have to reflect on the fact that land cannot be translated to land because they are false friends and don't mean exactly the same thing. So land is translated to country. Then we have the word et, which is translated to a in this context because a is required before a consonant sound in English. So country starts with k, which is a consonant sound, not a vowel sound. So we must use a country, not an country. Then we have the prepositional phrase ida norra delen, which includes the word I, which is translated to in. I becomes in, den norra, the northern, and delen becomes part. So ida norra delen, in the northern part. Then we simply translate of to of in English with an F, and Südamerika to South America. Remember that Südamerika is a compound, while South America is written as two separate words. And I'm afraid that's all for now. Good luck.